My name is Dan Zuberbeer, and I am the Education and Instructional Technology Librarian here at Joiner Library's Teaching Resources Center. And today I'll be talking a bit about some K12 copyright trends and issues. And so it's one of those topics that rarely ever gets covered in formal teacher education, and then even in professional development. Over and over and over again. Surveys show that teachers just, it's not a high priority on the professional development scale. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you guys some guidance. So there is all my stuff, my contact information, my fun title, and things like that. Excuse me, and I apologize for my voice and some of the coughing I'm going to do. Apparently being sick is just one of the things I do nowadays, and which is also the reason why I had to reschedule this session for today. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to breeze through copyright as much as I can. And just kind of let it sink in, because I think a lot of the stuff that you guys really want to listen to and hear about is just some examples of some common K12 scenarios that show up, and I'll talk about that at the end of the session. We'll also talk about fair use, some other licensed content alternatives like Creative Commons licenses, which are growing in popularity as we move along, especially here in higher education. And then also I'll pitch to you guys a ton of different resources that you and your students can use for videos, for music and audio, and images as well. And of course, I'll be sharing the link to this slideshow with you as soon as I'm done. I'll email it out to everybody who registered, share it far and wide so others can use some of these resources as well. But first, I need to give you guys this disclaimer. This presentation provides information about copyright law. The presenter makes every effort to ensure accuracy of this information, but is not offered as counsel or legal advice. Please consult an attorney for advice concerning your specific situation. Every time I talk about copyright, I have to give this message. That way, it's a liability issue. I hope you understand. Oh, I should also mention why am I kind of sort of a quasi-authority on copyright. I didn't really pay too much attention to copyright until I became a school librarian when I was in Arizona and made the transition from the classroom to the library. From there, going through my graduate work, going through library school, I picked up on a few things here and there. But then during my internship at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, my project was to help them develop all of the library's copyright web pages. And so really that's where all of my background in copyright comes from. And so that's my background, and so I can talk about copyright a bit, just like a lot of teachers and a lot of school librarians out there. School librarians know a fair amount. They should at least know the basics and be able to help you through the guidelines and walk you through some of the basics to help you make some of the best choices on the content and materials that you use for your classroom. So I'll get right into it. And talking about copyright and using images from the internet, you got to have pictures of cats, cute cats even, and that's why that picture is up there thanks to Flickr, and that's one of the things we'll talk about later on, where a lot of images on Flickr are just open and free to use. Excuse me. But so the rights that copyright gives excuse me, they have the right to may authorize others to do the following things: make copies of the work, distribute it, so on and so forth. But really, that's not that's easy to understand. The harder thing to understand is how long copyright is valid, because it's changed over the years, over the last century or so. And at the moment, until Congress figures it out and kind of rewrites the law, copyright is valid until 70 years after your death, or until you sell, assign, or give your copyright away to somebody else. Owners can give everything on that list. Owners can give those rights away to people, to organizations, to other entities through the transfer of ownership or licensing. A really good example is you can. A lot of authors will option their book or license their book out to be for the movie rights, and for authors, there's not a lot of money in it. I recently heard of a story where some playwright out of the blue just wrote Stephen King a novel or a letter and said, "Hey, I'd like to use one of your books, or this specific book. I want to make a play adaptation out of it." And Stephen King sent him a contract and said, "I'll sell the rights to you for $1." And so there's not a lot of money for authors, and it's when it comes to adapting for different uses. And a lot of times they'll give the okay, but other times there can be some catches. It's a lot of it just depends on the use. So here's what copyright protects. Basically, that huge list just means that a work, quote unquote work, needs to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression, or saved in some form. And those are just some of the examples of what a fixed in a tangible medium of expression are. And so, something on a whiteboard in your classroom, once it's erased, it's gone. So it's not a fixed medium. But if you save it for a specific purpose and you take a picture of it, then that picture becomes a tangible medium of expression. Or even if you put put something over the top of that drawing on a whiteboard, so it extends its life, then it becomes a more fixed in a tangible medium of expression. And so it can gain copyright protection. One of the benefits of one of the changes in copyright law dating back to the 1970s is you don't have to register in order to get copyright protection. In the old days, you used to have to register for copyright protection within a few years. Otherwise, people are free to do whatever with your work that they wanted. Nowadays, that's not so much. It's automatically protected by copyright. And if you only have to register is if you need to protect your copyright against somebody who's violating your rights as the author or creator of content. So another example I need to give you here is it must, all of these things, like files on a computer, drawings, are fixed. But one other catch is works must also include original creative expression. So since I'm a baseball guy, an alphabetical list of baseball players who are in the Hall of Fame, that's not really an original list. But if I go and do the research, and along with that list, that alphabetical list of Hall of Famers, I make an annotation and make it an annotated list and talk about their career accomplishments and give my reasoning as to why they're in Baseball Hall of Fame, then that becomes more original and deserves and is available for copyright protection. So what copyright does not protect? Procedures. If you do A and then B and then C and then D, then you reach the finished product, kind of like a training manual, processes, systems of operation. Those aren't protected. Ideas, broadly speaking, aren't quote unquote ownable under any U.S. intellectual property law. So that's why a lot of inventors are so secretive and don't talk about their ideas until they actually apply for and gain a patent for it. Or even think of, if anybody's a Shark Tank fan on Friday night and watches that show, the reason why all of those sharks, those investors, ask if they have a patent is because if it doesn't have a patent, then it's just an idea, and anybody can use that idea. Of course, patent law is a whole different beast than copyright, but I hope it drives the point home. Titles, names, short phrases, slogans really fail to meet the standard of originality. So even familiar symbols or designs, variations of font styles or orientation or lettering or recipes, mere listings of ingredients or contents really don't qualify. And so a lot of recipes are really easy to change and modify and kind of fall into that transformative nature. And so if you see a recipe you really like from a book in the bookstore, I bet you could go online and find it and find one little thing that's changed in the ingredient list, or one little thing in the temperature of the oven is set at, and then it becomes more. It's kind of a gray area, but it could be considered transformative enough so the copyright holder or the creator of that recipe doesn't have a leg to stand on when it comes to court. Author's rights. This is really the biggest difference between higher education and K12 education. There's other smaller differences, but this is really the big one. Higher education faculty have more control over the content that they create. Like East Carolina University, it specifically states in our faculty manual that whatever faculty create while they're on the job, like articles for journals that they submit, or research studies and the products of that, or even an invention that they create and then they can sell. Authors or creators of materials hold a lot of sway and can keep a lot of those rights. And when it comes to an article that you put in a journal, the ECU in the faculty manual says, hey, that's yours. And so higher education faculty have a lot of control over the things that they produce. K12 educators, not so much. Creating materials like lesson plans and worksheets and other things is considered part of your job duties, and especially if you sit in your classroom in your planning period and you use your school computer to create these things, it's a work for hire. And so according to the Copyright Act of 1976, you don't own that copyright, your school district does. And so things like Teachers Pay Teachers and weareteachers.com, when teachers share things on those websites and sell things like lesson plans and other instructional materials on those websites to other teachers, they're actually violating copyright because they don't own that material. One One recent case was Prince George's County in Maryland. The school board actually went to court to get money from a teacher who actually made thousands of dollars selling their lesson plans on paid teachers. And so it's a possibility. That's kind of the exception. There aren't a lot of K12 school districts just tracking down or surveilling and then tracking down teachers who are selling their stuff on these websites. But it is a possibility. And the teacher wouldn't have much of a chance in court because of everything they create for the class and use in the classroom is owned by the school district. So fair use, everybody loves fair use. Everybody I know who's an educator, no matter what level you are at, loves fair use. Because there's a lot of things educators can use and get away with. I shouldn't say get away with, but a lot of things educators can use and not violate copyright that others can't. So for purposes of teaching, criticism, scholarship, there's a lot of leeway. And so one of the misconceptions of surrounding copyright is that it's black and white. And it rarely ever is black and white on yes, you can use this, it's fair use, or no, you can't use that, it's not fair use. And so it's a whole lot of gray, dark gray areas, light gray areas, many different shades of gray. And so following what's going on in the copyright world based on legal opinions and court cases comes into play quite a bit when considering whether or not using something in your own classroom is considered fair use. So these are the 4 factors, and I provide that link to Stanford's Measuring Fair Use page at the bottom. Purpose and character of use, nature of the copyrighted work, amount and substantiality of the portion used, and effect on the potential market. It's not a one and done thing. When these cases go to court, judges are required by law to look at all 4 factors of fair use. And so you can't just say, hey, this person is violating the purpose and character of the use. Fine, but if they're not infringing on 2, 3, and 4, then it's quite possible that infringing on copyright just isn't happening. And so judges go through a very delicate balancing act of all 4 factors. And one factor doesn't necessarily weigh more than any of the others. In some cases they do, other cases they don't. Again, it's that gray area. And so those descriptions of fair use and some examples on Stanford's website will really help you out, and I hope you use that site in the future to help you determine fair use. Some other things that you can use to help you determine fair use, like is the fair use evaluator, which is linked. It's just you go through a series of questions and answer them as you go through it. The Brew College tutorial is also very good, and the link doesn't want to open up, and helps you just kind of work through things. I lost my sharing capabilities. We'll say So it is more towards, leans more towards other medias besides print or text. So audio and images and video, but it's interactive. It's a really good tool to give you guys some basic info to help you make the best choices in your own case. So there are options out there, and for those of you who are school librarians, I hope you put some of these links, some of these tools into your own toolkit to help your teachers make the best possible choice as well. So beyond fair use, there are some, if things are licensed, if you can't get permission, well, in order to get permission, one, it's best to get it in writing, and two, the copyright holder may issue some requirements that go along with the use of their work. And so it's, if your use is beyond fair or in violation of the license, you have to stop and take an extra step. So asking for permission, usually in writing, and hopefully you'll be granted permission. And if you do, get it in writing. That way you have something to refer to if your use is ever called into question. And sometimes that just means planning ahead. This isn't necessarily granting you somebody permission to use something isn't necessarily a high priority for the rights holder. So you may have to wait to get the answer. If you don't get an answer, the copyright holder doesn't give you the okay, you simply just can't use the item, and you need to move on. Some of those restrictions or requirements, you may have to pay a fee, show attribution in a certain way, or place other, they can place any number of requirements on you in order to use it. If you can't meet the requirements that the rights holder requests of you, then unfortunately you simply can't use the item. But there are substitutes. Public domain, items in the public domain, or other licenses will give you some other options like Creative Commons licenses. These do two things. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Creative Commons. It's a nonprofit organization that a number of years ago set up a simple, easy to understand copyright licenses. And so it really kind of cuts through all of the gray area when it comes to copyright law. It allows you, creators of content, to share their work more easily and place some of the some restrictions that and even freedoms, and grant as many freedoms as they want, so others can use their work. Plus, it gives those who would like to use copyrighted work an opportunity to find materials that are free to use, and they don't even need to ask for permission. And so these licenses really simplify the process. So here are the licenses: the CC BY and the CC BY NC on the right-hand side are probably the two most common licenses used. So CC BY is the creator, the rights holder, saying, hey, you can use it. You don't even have to ask, as long as you just say it was created by Dan Zuberbeer. So that's probably what I'll end up doing. Excuse me, what I'll end up doing with this PowerPoint slideshow. Just make it CC BY. CC BY SA, where you give attribution where credit is due, and then also if you make any changes to it, then the rights holder is asking you to share. CC BY ND, no derivatives, so you give attribution and you can't make any changes. CC BY NC, You can use it however you like, as long as it's not for commercial, not for profit. And as you can see, these are kind of getting more and more restrictive as we go along. CC BY NC SA, not commercial, you can't make any money off it, plus you need to share. CC BY NC and D, give attribution, can't make money off it, and no derivatives. And so that link there at the bottom of the page will take you straight to the Creative Commons licensing page, and it'll give a little more detail on what these letters and images mean, for one, and for two, it'll also show you how you can attach Creative Commons licenses to the works that you create. A little bit about the public domain. In short, it's just material with an expired copyright, or it's material that is just simply donated to the public domain. I mentioned Flickr earlier, and all of the images, many of the images that are on Flickr, people who freely share their images on Flickr usually tend to mark it with a CC0. And so just saying, hey, public domain, you can use this however you want. Most U.S. government publications are in the public domain, where they can be freely used and adapted and cut apart into sections and used in pieces without any problem. And the U.S. government is getting better at sharing their publications with the public domain, especially now more and more, especially in the National Science Foundation and other grant funding institutions like the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Institutes of Health are starting to jump on the bandwagon as well. But really the National Science Foundation is leading the charge with government-funded research. Everything needs to be openly accessible, not necessarily in the public domain, but at least openly accessible because taxpayers funded the research. So the government is doing better. It's still not great. It would be much better if Congress would take a second look at current copyright law and update it for the internet age, the information age, and it would clear a lot of things up and make fair and help you guys as educators determine whether or not fair use is applicable or not to your specific situation. But another thing that'll help you figure out whether or not something's in the public domain is the digital copyright slider. The good people at the American Library Association Office for Information Technology Policy created this a few years ago. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the page, between 1923 and now, there's been a lot of changes in copyright law. And so there's different requirements. There were different requirements for copyright back then, there's compared to now. And so all of this makes determining fair use and what's in the public domain such a gray area. In black and white just really doesn't exist. And so on the right-hand side of the page, you can just use this little slider and look at what pops up on the left. It's interactive. It helps you if it pops up with a maybe, with an asterisk. You can click on it to get more information. Along with the anything in the copyright status or term, anything that pops up with an asterisk, you can click on it for more information. And so it's a pretty handy tool. And I hope it'll come in useful for you as well. Here's some very specific resources for K12. As I was looking over this, PowerPoint earlier today, I was so disappointed that there was one resource that I had to change and take out of it because it doesn't exist anymore. But and it included so many different lesson plans and infographics that K-12 educators could just simply fit into the content that they teach in the classes and do it pretty seamlessly. The next best thing, though, is Kathy Schrock's RIP, or Respect for Intellectual Property. There's a lot of K-12 presentation support links for anybody who's looking for some more in-depth stuff, or teachers who teach AP classes or early college classes. These higher ed presentation links might fit your needs a little bit better. And then, of course, there's also some copyright lesson plans and resources as well, and some copyright-friendly sites. So there's a lot of wonderful resources here. Brigham Young University's checklist for fair use. I've used that in the past. It's a wonderful resource. Code of best practices in fair use. Comes from the Center for Social Media. The Temple University Media Education Lab helped develop this, along with the Center for Social Media.org. And it runs through a lot of the basics of copyright, of fair use, especially when it comes to different forms of media, some beyond just print works. So, excuse me. There's also links to the teaching tools from the University of Rhode Island. That is based on the Association of Research Libraries Code of Best Practices, and that's more higher education based, and that Code of Best Practices is usually what I look at when faculty come to me with questions. Education World's Copyright Series also shows, I believe it's a 5-part series, gives you a little introduction of what it is, but then talks about copyrights, copying wrongs, fair use, and new technologies, just some background in how copyright law and new technologies kind of sometimes play nice, but other times they don't, and then applying fair use to new technologies, and then your responsibilities as a teacher and district liabilities. And those, I've gone through those, each one of those parts, and they're actually pretty well put together and very informative. Now, when I talk about copyright, especially to the pre-service teachers that I have here on ECU's campus, once I get to this point, I tend to, for some reason, I don't try to, I tend to scare the living crap out of them. They're like, oh my goodness, I'm only going to use items in the public domain. And you don't have to do that. As educators, there's a lot of leeway that we have when it comes to fair use, as long as we're smart about it, and use items responsibly and give credit where credit is due. So just like all of those research papers that you wrote in college, in your undergraduate work, or even your graduate work, and you give credit where credit is due, and say, hey, this is where I got it from. For the most part, you should be okay. And I am not aware of any copyright holder that says, you know what, I'm going to sue a K-12 teacher today. I've never heard of a case being brought against um, an individual teacher. I don't even think I've ever heard of a case um, brought against a school or a school district um, in K-12 education. Um, Usually when rights holders um, bring uh, an infringement case to court, usually it's against it's something fairly egregious or on a grander scale than um, what happens within one teacher's classroom. So I don't mean to scare anybody off, um, but we just need to use a little bit of common sense, use some of the tools um, as a that I've shared with you today as a reference, and um, they should help you make some good decisions. So like I mentioned earlier, I will share this whole presentation, this slideshow with you. And so these are image resources that are freely available, and the vast majority of these searches, you can search for images in the public domain. Like, oh, I haven't even told you about um, how you can limit your search in a simple Google search to just things that are openly available or in the public domain, or follow a specific Creative Commons license. And since my daughter loves penguins, that's what we'll search for. When we come up with penguins, yeah, Pittsburgh Penguins come up first. But if we switch over to images, we get what I'm looking for. And under search tools, you can look at the drop-down menu of usage rights. And so right now, I'm not filtered by license. So all of this, it's absolutely or almost impossible to tell just by looking at the image whether or not the rights or the creator of that image has the copyright. And then underneath, labeled for reuse with modification, labeled for reuse, non-commercial reuse with modification. That's just a different way of talking about those different Creative Commons licenses I was talking before. So I'm going to look at labeled for reuse. It's the one with the least amount of restrictions, and it filters away everything else that I can't use or that's not under that label. And so all of these are free to use. As I would still give credit where credit is due and say, like this first one here, I got this one off of Wikipedia or Wikipedia Commons or Wikimedia Commons, depending on what pops up when you visit the page. But that's a lot of the issues that K-12 educators find with their students is just freely seeing their students freely take images off the internet without, one, knowing where they get them from, and two, not paying attention to whether or not they're infringing on copyright. And using Google image search or Bing or Yahoo, wherever your favorite search engine is, and all of them have this filter by usage rights to help your students make some responsible choices. Creative Commons also has their search, and here are a lot of different avenues to look for openly available and free to use images in media and videos and so on and so forth, and music from different sources that are free to use with attribution. Here's some music resources. Some of these you may have seen on the Creative Commons page that I was just showing you. Video resources. So there's a lot of there are a lot of tools out there that you and your students can use and not be afraid of infringing on copyright. As long as you're smart about it and use some basic common sense and use some of the resources that I pointed you towards, you should be able to not that you've lost sleep over this issue, but it should help you feel more comfortable in your own classroom and working with your colleagues and working with your own students on what's fair use and what's not in a classroom setting. So now, in the next few slides, I'm going to ask you guys some questions and give you guys some time to think about it before I give you the answer. Some common scenarios that you might find in the K12 classroom. So there's a copy right, a copy wrong, a fair use or right use of a work, but it's not a copyright issue, or a wrong use of a word, but it's not a copyright issue. So a teacher downloads a YouTube video and uses it in their class. For those of you who said wrong, but, give yourself a high five. It's wrong, but it's not a copyright issue. This is actually a violation of the terms of service that you agree to when you sign up for or create a YouTube account. So it's not so much using it in class. If you're going to use a YouTube video in class, you don't have to download it. If you just play it from YouTube's website and it's for an educational purpose, you should be in the copyright. But if you download it and then start to share it, especially to a group of people, then you're violating the terms of service. Next example. Students create a mural of popular cartoon characters on a wall in the school library. Bit of a trick question because there's two right answers. It's copy wrong because it is a violation of copyright. It's not fair use because it's not technically for an educational purpose, and so it's just displaying of art, and so it's not educational fair use. But you could also argue that it's wrong, but not a copyright issue, because those images of popular cartoon characters aren't necessarily protected under copyright. They're usually protected under trademark laws. Next example. Your local PTA videotapes the spring concert and then sells the DVDs of that concert for a profit. For those of you who said copy wrong, you are correct. So it's not making the videos and selling them for a profit that's wrong. It's the music that's played in the spring concert. The PTA or whoever creates the video doesn't have the right to distribute that music in another way. So the band leader or the choir director would have to get permission from the rights holder in order to put on the concert using that music. But then the PTA would have to gain permission in order to use the music that's contained in the spring concert and then put on the DVD to distribute it as well. There are some ways to there may be some avenues to wiggle, some wiggle room to work around this, but since the PTA is selling it for a profit, it's highly unlikely that they'd be able to get permission without being required to pay royalties to the rights holder. Number 4, teacher training sessions are conducted using Google Docs, and the administrator shows video clips on how other teachers use them to collaborate with their colleagues and their students. So I leave it kind of open for interpretation because I don't tell you where the video clips come from. But really, because it's for an educational purpose, it falls under fair use. Even if it's a professional development training session with other teachers, it's within an educational setting, and should almost always be considered fair use. Number 5, at a pep rally before senior football players' last game, cheerleaders play a 5-minute slideshow of pictures taken of each player with music playing in the background. So this is a very common thing that happens. This happened pretty much almost every pep rally I've ever attended as a high school teacher. This happened. And kind of a general rule of thumb when it comes to music is 30-second clips of music is the maximum amount. But even if the cheerleaders set the soundtrack to switch songs or change songs every 30 seconds or every 29 seconds, this particular case, using it for this purpose, or using the music for this purpose, is still infringing on copyright, and it's not fair use because it's not not happening in a classroom, and this has actually been argued before a court where this type of use isn't considered educational fair use. Last one, students create a podcast of a book and post the audio on a password-protected website. This is a great example of some of the gray areas copyright lawyers need to work with and judges work with as well. This can either be copyright or copy wrong. This type of project for students, it favors educational fair use, but it's not really transformative. It might infringe upon copyright just because all students are doing are taking a print text and then translating it and using the same words and making it an audio clip, an audio reading of the book. So you're really only changing the format. But because they're putting it behind a password-protected website, it leans towards educational fair use because they're limiting access to that recording of the book. But password-protected websites don't always guarantee that it is an extension of the classroom, although generally courts do view password-protected websites as an extension of the classroom in and even higher education as well. We deal with that a lot here in higher ed, especially when it comes to journal articles, where professors want to upload journal articles on their Blackboard site, their course site, so students can easily access them. And since Blackboard is a password-protected website, for the most part, we're generally protected, but there's also some limitations with what we can do. So that is all I have for you today. I thank you for bearing with me and all of the coughs, and at least I have my voice back, unlike last week. But here's my contact information. There's a short quiz that goes along with this little presentation if you're looking to earn some time towards a CEU, along with the rest of the videos in the ECU's Teacher Toolbox series. And then also I'm always trying to figure out what I did right, what I did wrong, what we could do differently, other topics that we could cover in the Teacher Toolbox series. So I encourage you to follow the link to the session evaluation and give me some feedback, and give us some feedback for the entire series. Since this is a new thing we're doing, we're not quite sure what direction we're going to take it in, and we want to give you guys as much of an opportunity as possible to lead us in the direction that you guys want us to go. So really, when it comes down to copyright and fair use, I think it's reasonable to ask teachers to know the basics. It helps them make better decisions on what to use and how things can be used in their own classroom. And then it also helps them teach their students what fair use is and what the limitations of copyright are in educational settings and then outside of education as well. So I really hope you take a closer look at a lot of the resources I've pointed you to in this slideshow and bookmark them, share them with your colleagues. The more knowledgeable we are with at least the basics, the better off we'll all be. Thank you for viewing in, and I hope to be in touch with you soon. Have a great day.